Black pilot told to wait outside. Minutes later, she takes down an entire airline. Ava Mitchell had always been told she flew like she was born with wings. But on that cold December morning, those wings were clipped, not by turbulence or mechanical failure, but by 7 words that would change everything. "Captain Mitchell, we need you to wait outside." She never imagined that a single sentence, spoken so casually, would ignite a chain reaction, one that would ultimately bring down one of America's oldest airlines. But it wouldn't crash from the sky. No, SkyWest Airlines would collapse under the weight of its own corruption. The morning fog clung to the runways at JFK International Airport as Ava wheeled her pilot's case through the sprawling terminal. At 37 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had mastered the sky. With over 15,000 flight hours logged, she had flown across every continent except Antarctica. Her uniform was impeccable, the 4 gold stripes on each sleeve glinting under the terminal's fluorescent lights. She checked her watch. 5:17 a.m. The briefing for flight SK-27 to San Francisco was scheduled for 5:30 a.m. That gave her just enough time to grab a quick coffee in the crew lounge before meeting her co-pilot. The crew lounge doors swung open, releasing the rich aroma of fresh coffee mixed with a low murmur of morning conversations. Inside, pilots and flight attendants gathered around tables, reviewing flight plans, checking the latest weather reports, or scrolling through their phones. As Ava approached the coffee station, she felt it, a subtle shift in the room. Conversations paused for a second too long. Curious glances were exchanged. She was used to it. According to industry statistics, less than 1% of commercial airline pilots were black women. Most people weren't used to seeing someone like her wearing those 4 gold stripes. She had barely poured her coffee when a voice called from behind. "You must be Captain Mitchell." Ava turned to see a man in his mid-50s, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his uniform crisp, 4 stripes on each sleeve, just like hers. "Captain Stephen Caldwell," he introduced himself, extending a firm hand. "Welcome to SkyWest." Ava shook his hand with equal firmness. "Thank you, sir. It's an honor to be here." "Stephen, please," he corrected her with a thin smile that never quite reached his eyes. Something about him put her on edge. She had encountered men like Caldwell before, men who smiled, but silently calculated all the ways she might fail. "I'll be your check captain for the next few weeks," Caldwell continued. "I assume you've reviewed the flight path for today?" "Yes, sir," Ava replied without hesitation. "I've memorized SkyWest's approach procedures for SFO. There's some turbulence expected over the Rockies, but nothing unusual for this time of year." Caldwell gave a slow, unreadable nod. "Good. The crew is waiting in briefing room C. I'll meet you there in 5." As he walked away, Ava felt her stomach tighten. Years in the cockpit had sharpened her instincts, and something about Caldwell set off alarms in her mind. Still, she took a deep breath and stirred her coffee, catching a glimpse of herself in the metallic reflection of the machine. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far." She had lived by those words, earning her place in this industry the hard way, graduating at the top of her class at the Air Force Academy, serving 8 years as a military transport pilot, including 3 tours in Afghanistan, before transitioning to commercial aviation. And yet, even now, with all of that experience behind her, something told her that today would be different. She was right. She just didn't know how different it would be. Because in just a few moments, her career would take a turn that no one saw coming, and before the dust settled, SkyWest Airlines would be grounded forever. The briefing room buzzed with activity as Ava Mitchell stepped inside, her pilot's case rolling behind her. 6 flight attendants sat around the table, reviewing passenger manifests and service protocols. At the head of the table, her assigned co-pilot, Daniel Carter, a young pilot with just under 5 years of commercial experience, glanced up as she entered. "Captain Mitchell," he greeted her with a genuine smile. "I've heard great things. Looking forward to flying with you." Ava barely had time to respond before the door swung open again. In walked Gregory Simmons, SkyWest Airlines Executive Operations Director, his mere presence commanding attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a perpetual frown, Simmons carried the kind of authority that didn't require words. Behind him, Captain Stephen Caldwell followed, his expression unreadable. Simmons cleared his throat before addressing the room. "There's been a change of plans," he announced, deliberately avoiding Ava's gaze. Her stomach tightened. "Captain Caldwell will be taking command of Flight SK-27 today." He barely paused before adding, "Captain Mitchell, we need you to wait outside while we reassign you." The room fell silent. Ava felt the heat creep up her neck. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. Her voice remained steady, but sharp as a blade. "May I ask why?" Simmons exchanged a glance with Caldwell before responding. "It's a matter of experience." His tone was flat, final. "San Francisco is a challenging approach, and given your unfamiliarity with our protocols..." Ava cut him off. "With all due respect, I've flown into SFO 73 times over the past decade, including in severe weather conditions." She kept her posture strong, her voice unwavering. "My qualifications were thoroughly reviewed during the hiring process." Simmons' tone hardened. "Captain Mitchell, this isn't up for discussion. Please wait outside." Ava considered pushing back further but stopped herself. This wasn't the hill to die on. Not yet. With as much dignity as she could muster, she nodded, set her flight documents down on the table, and walked out. The hallway felt colder than it had moments before. She leaned against the wall, her mind racing. In 20 years of flying, she had faced discrimination in countless forms, from passengers who asked for a different pilot after seeing her, to colleagues who made snide remarks about affirmative action. But this wasn't casual bias. This was systematic, calculated, and deliberate. 10 minutes passed. The door opened, but it wasn't Simmons or Caldwell. Daniel Carter stepped out, looking uncomfortable. "Sorry about that, Captain." His voice was low. "For what it's worth, I think it's complete nonsense." Ava's jaw tightened. "What did they say after I left?" Daniel hesitated. "They claimed it was standard procedure for new captains." He trailed off, glancing down the hallway before lowering his voice further. "Look, I've been here 3 years. I've seen 4 new captains start. None of them got pulled from their first flight." A familiar heaviness settled in Ava's chest. "Thanks for telling me." Daniel shifted, his body language uneasy. "There's more." He leaned in. "I've been assigned as Caldwell's co-pilot. But they want you to shadow Flight 422 to Seattle." Ava narrowed her eyes. "Seattle?" "They're saying it's to acclimate you to company procedures." He made air quotes with his fingers. Ava nodded slowly. "And who's captaining that flight?" Daniel sighed. "Leonard Hayes." The name struck like a hammer blow. Hayes was SkyWest's most senior captain, and according to industry gossip, one of its loudest voices against diversity in the cockpit. She had never met him, but his reputation preceded him. "I see," she said quietly. Daniel hesitated. "Captain, if you want to file a complaint, I'll back you up." Ava considered it. A complaint on her first day would brand her as difficult, regardless of the merits. She had spent her entire career navigating these treacherous waters. She knew when to fight and when to wait. "Let me handle Flight 422 first," she decided. "But I appreciate the offer. Not everyone would stick their neck out like that." Daniel nodded, understanding the unspoken calculation. "Good luck with Hayes," he muttered. "He can be old-fashioned." Ava nearly laughed at the euphemism. "I've dealt with old-fashioned before." The flight to Seattle became Ava's personal purgatory. "Captain Leonard Hayes, A man in his early 60s with thinning gray hair and a permanent scowl, acknowledged her presence with nothing more than a curt nod before ignoring her entirely. His first officer, Andrew Miller, shot her occasional apologetic glances, but remained silent. Ava took the jump seat behind them, observing as they went through pre-flight procedures. Despite his personal failings, Hayes was meticulous, efficient, and experienced. He knew how to fly. But as the Boeing 737 taxied onto the runway, he finally spoke to her. "I don't know what kind of operation you came from, Captain Mitchell," he said without turning. "But at SkyWest, we do things by the book. No shortcuts. No improvisations." The implication was clear. He assumed she was less rigorous, less professional. Ava's response was measured, but sharp. "Standardization is the foundation of safety, Captain." Hayes grunted, disappointed she hadn't taken the bait. The flight to Seattle was mercifully short, just under 2 hours. But in those 2 hours, Hayes made sure to narrate every action he took, his tone condescending, as if she were a rookie, not a captain with thousands of flight hours. Ava absorbed the humiliation silently, focusing on observing SkyWest's procedures. Then, during descent, he made an error. A minor one, but noticeable. He entered the wrong frequency for approach control. Andrew Miller either didn't catch it or was too intimidated to correct him. Ava hesitated. "Do I say something? Or do I let them doubt me?" She made her choice. "Captain," she said calmly, "I believe Seattle approach is on 28.35 today, not 124.75. The cockpit went silent. His shoulders tensed. A few beats passed before he checked the approach chart. "That's correct." His voice was stiff. "Thank you, Captain Mitchell." Ava expected that would be the end of it. But as they taxied to the gate, Hayes surprised her. "You have a good eye." He still didn't look at her. Most wouldn't have caught that. Ava met his cold, blue gaze. "With respect, Captain, traditions evolve. They have to." Hayes' expression hardened. "Not at SkyWest, they don't." Ava said nothing. But in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just shadowing a flight. She was stepping into a battlefield. And if SkyWest thought she would back down, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The warning signs. For the remainder of the week, Ava Mitchell was assigned to shadow multiple captains, all of them men, all of them with reputations similar to Leonard Hayes. The pattern was clear. They weren't just testing her. They were hazing her. They wanted to see how long it would take before she quit. Every assignment felt like a punishment: less desirable routes, little rest between flights, excessive scrutiny of her performance. No other new captain was treated this way. She knew it. And so did they. That evening, Ava sat in her newly rented apartment in New York City, a glass of Cabernet in hand, her laptop open in front of her as she video-called her younger sister, Olivia Mitchell. "They did what?" Olivia's indignant voice filled the screen. Her lawyer instincts immediately kicked into gear. "Ava, that's textbook discrimination. You could sue them into oblivion." Ava sighed, sinking deeper into her couch. "And then what?" she muttered. "Then they'd be forced to treat you fairly." "No." Ava shook her head. "I'd be known as the black woman who sued her way into the cockpit. I'd never have the crew's trust." Olivia's frustration was palpable. "So you're just going to take it?" Ava's jaw tightened. "I didn't say that." There was a hint of steel in her voice now. "I said I'm not suing, yet." Olivia frowned. "So what's your plan?" Ava took a slow sip of wine, considering her words carefully. "I need to understand what I'm dealing with. This feels organized, systemic. I need to know if it's just a handful of old dinosaurs clinging to the past or if it goes deeper." Olivia's expression softened. Be careful, Ava. These corporate types protect their own. Ava exhaled. I know. But I didn't come this far to be pushed out before I even get started. Later that night, unable to sleep, she opened her laptop and began researching SkyWest Airlines more thoroughly. The company had been founded in 1967, expanding from a small regional carrier into a national airline with international routes. On the surface, its safety record was solid, if unexceptional. But something else stood out. The leadership team was overwhelmingly white and male. There were only 2 women on the entire board of directors. Not a single person of color in upper management. More tellingly, employee reviews on job sites revealed a pattern. White male employees left glowing feedback. But reviews from women and minorities told a different story. Phrases like old boys network and unwelcoming culture appeared frequently, though always vague, careful, just enough to hint at the truth without spelling it out. Then she dug deeper. Lawsuits. 3 discrimination suits in the past decade. All settled out of court. All sealed with non-disclosure agreements. 2 were filed by female flight attendants. 1 involved a Hispanic ground crew supervisor. Nothing in the public record detailed what happened next. She was about to close her laptop when one last article caught her eye. SkyWest Airlines faces National Aviation Safety Board, NASB, scrutiny over maintenance logs. The piece was brief, mentioning only that NASB was conducting a review of SkyWest's maintenance procedures after minor discrepancies were found. But something about the timing nagged at her. The airline had recently expanded its international routes, meaning more planes in the air, less time for maintenance, more pressure on ground crews. Were they cutting corners? She bookmarked the article. She'd need to look into this further. The next morning, Ava reported for her latest shadowing assignment, a flight to Denver. This time, she was assigned to Captain Andrew Peterson. Unlike the others, Peterson was different. He was cordial, if reserved. Mid-flight, as they reached cruising altitude, he finally turned to her. For what it's worth, he said quietly. Not all of us agree with how you're being treated. Ava studied him. But you're not speaking up either. Peterson had the grace to look embarrassed. It's complicated. Ava arched an eyebrow. That word again. Peterson hesitated, then lowered his voice further. Watch yourself around Simmons and Caldwell. They've been friends for 30 years. Simmons protects Caldwell and his circle, no matter what. Ava's stomach tightened. No matter what? Peterson's expression shifted, unease flickering across his face. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. A long pause. Then, Peterson faced forward again, his posture stiffening. I've said too much already. Just keep your eyes open. Ava filed that away. Between flights, she made a point of visiting the maintenance hangar, introducing herself to the ground crew under the pretense of learning SkyWest's maintenance protocols. Most of them were polite but distant. One, however, warmed up to her almost immediately. A middle-aged black man named Robert Wallace. They quickly discovered they had both grown up in Detroit. 23 years, Robert told her as he inspected an engine cowling. I've been keeping these birds in the air for 23 years. Seen a lot of changes? Ava asked, keeping her tone casual. Robert glanced around before answering. Not all of them good. Ava's heartbeat quickened. How so? Robert hesitated, then lowered his voice. New management is pushing us to speed things up. More flights, less turnaround time. Some checks that used to be mandatory? Now they're at the technician's discretion. Ava felt a chill run down her spine. Is that even legal? Robert grimaced. Gray area. They've got fancy lawyers who know how to word things so it sounds kosher. But between us? I wouldn't put my family on some of these planes. Ava's stomach dropped. Before she could press further, a supervisor appeared, eyeing their conversation suspiciously. Robert quickly returned to work. Ava thanked him and walked away, her mind racing with implications. 3 weeks into her employment, Ava was finally assigned to captain a flight, a red-eye from JFK to Las Vegas. Daniel Carter was assigned as her first officer, which she suspected wasn't a coincidence. If they expected her to fail, they'd want a friendly witness. During the pre-flight inspection, Ava noticed something off. The maintenance logs had discrepancies. The dates on routine checks didn't match up. She questioned the ground crew. They assured her everything was within parameters. She wasn't satisfied. She insisted on a more thorough inspection, delaying the flight by 20 minutes. A cardinal sin in an industry obsessed with on-time departures. Daniel looked uneasy. "Are you sure that's necessary, Captain?" Ava didn't hesitate. Better 20 minutes late than not arriving at all. Something wasn't right. And Ava Mitchell was going to find out exactly what it was. The meeting was a trap, and Ava Mitchell knew it the moment she walked in. Inside SkyWest Airlines executive offices, Gregory Simmons, the airline's executive operations director, sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his expression unreadable. Stephen Caldwell, the captain who had taken her first scheduled flight from her, stood near the window with his arms crossed. Ava sat straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Captain Mitchell," Simmons began, "I understand you delayed Flight 889 last night with an unnecessary inspection." Ava met his gaze without flinching. The maintenance logs showed inconsistencies that warranted further examination. Simmons leaned back in his chair, dismissively waving a hand. "Our ground crew cleared that aircraft." "And I overruled them," Ava responded, "based on my 20 years of experience and National Aviation Safety Board (NASB) regulations, which require complete and accurate documentation before every flight." Simmons' expression darkened. "Captain Mitchell, at SkyWest, we value efficiency alongside safety. Delays cost this company thousands of dollars. If you can't trust our established procedures, perhaps this isn't the right environment for you." The threat hung in the air between them. Ava saw the trap clearly. She could either back down and pretend she hadn't seen the discrepancies, or stand her ground and risk her career. She chose the only option her conscience would allow. "Mr. Simmons," she said carefully, "are you suggesting I should overlook discrepancies in maintenance logs?" Simmons' jaw tightened. "I'm suggesting you should trust the expertise of our maintenance teams." Ava nodded slowly, her voice calm but unwavering. "Would you mind putting that directive in writing for my records?" Simmons' face flushed with irritation. "That won't be necessary." Ava stood. "Then I'll continue doing my job as required by federal regulations." As she walked out of the office, she felt the weight of what had just happened. She had officially escalated the conflict beyond repair. Simmons wouldn't forget the challenge, and neither would his allies. She was now a problem that needed to be dealt with. And if SkyWest Airlines thought she would back down, they were about to learn how wrong they were. That night, Ava sat in her apartment, surrounded by evidence. She spread out all the notes, maintenance records, warning signs, and policy violations she had been collecting. The picture they painted was disturbing. SkyWest Airlines was systematically cutting corners on maintenance, pressuring employees to overlook safety violations, and creating a culture where raising concerns was punished. Ava stared at the scattered documents, knowing what she had to do. But the consequences would be severe. Her entire career, meticulously built over decades, would likely never recover. The aviation industry was small. Whistleblowers rarely found welcome elsewhere. Still, she thought of her father, a man who had built his reputation on integrity. "Flying isn't just a job," he had told her when she earned her first pilot's license at 19. "It's a sacred trust. People put their lives in your hands." She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had saved weeks ago, one she had hoped never to use. Her sister, Olivia Mitchell, answered immediately. Her voice was sharp, professional, her lawyer instincts in full effect. "Ava?" Ava exhaled. "It's me. I need your help." A brief pause on the line. "You're sure about this?" Ava looked at the evidence spread before her. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Okay," Olivia said. "Tell me everything." The next morning, Ava walked into SkyWest Airlines headquarters with a strange sense of calm. She had spent hours with Olivia outlining her observations, cross-referencing regulations, and preparing documentation. At 3:00 a.m., after Olivia had finally fallen asleep on Ava's couch, Ava had sat alone in the darkness, contemplating the path ahead. There was no turning back now. Before heading to the airport, she made two crucial phone calls. The first was to Olivia's contact at the NASP, arranging a formal meeting the next day. The second was to a journalist at the New York Times, someone who specialized in corporate accountability stories. With the seeds planted, Ava headed to JFK International Airport, the weight of her decision settling firmly on her shoulders. The pre-flight briefing for the Boston route was tense. Word had already spread about her confrontation with Simmons. Some crew members avoided eye contact. Others watched her with a mix of curiosity and respect. Daniel Carter, assigned again as her first officer, gave her a subtle nod of support. Ava was reviewing the flight plan when the briefing room door opened again. Stephen Caldwell walked in. Ava's gut immediately told her something was wrong. "Captain Mitchell," Caldwell announced, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "There's been a change. I'll be taking command of this flight." Ava looked up from her paperwork. "On whose authority?" "Executive operations," Caldwell replied. He didn't bother to hide his smirk. "They feel a more experienced captain is needed for today's weather conditions." Ava glanced at the weather report. The sky was clear blue, with perfect conditions all the way to Boston. She knew exactly what this was. A public humiliation. A message to everyone watching. Ava calmly closed her flight manual and folded her hands. "And what will my duties be?" Caldwell barely concealed his satisfaction. "You're being reassigned to administrative tasks. Report to HR when we return." Ava felt every pair of eyes in the room on her. Daniel looked uncomfortable. The flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew what was happening, but none dared to speak up. Ava gathered her things with deliberate calmness. "Very well." She looked around the room. "Good flight, everyone." As she walked out, she heard footsteps behind her. Lauren Adams, the senior flight attendant, followed her into the hallway. Her voice was hushed but urgent. "This isn't right." Ava offered a small, knowing smile. "Some battles aren't meant to be fought in the open." Lauren hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "I have photos." Ava's heart raced. "Of what?" "Flight 336 to Toronto, last month." Lauren's voice barely above a whisper. "The cabin pressure valve had a crack. Visual inspection failed. They cleared it anyway because delaying would have triggered crew rest requirements and cancelled 3 more flights." Ava's chest tightened. "That's serious." Lauren nodded firmly. "I know. That's why I documented it. I've been keeping records for months, but I was afraid." She trailed off, glancing over her shoulder. "I could lose everything." Ava's voice was gentle but firm. "You still could. Are you sure about this?" Lauren met her eyes, unwavering. "What's the point of having a career if people could die because I stayed silent?" Ava felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, admiration, and a renewed sense of purpose. "Send everything to this email." She scribbled an address on a piece of paper. "It's secure." "And Lauren?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." Ava Mitchell had started a war she could no longer walk away from. And SkyWest Airlines had no idea what was coming for them. Ava Mitchell sat across from SkyWest Airlines' top brass, her heartbeat steady, her expression unreadable. Gregory Simmons, Executive Operations Director, sat at the head of the table, his face pale. Stephen Caldwell, the senior captain who had tried to sabotage her, clenched his jaw in frustration. Harold Whitman, head of legal, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They had called this meeting to end her career, to make her disappear. But Ava had walked in prepared to destroy them instead. Simmons cleared his throat. "We'll need time to review your claims." Ava leaned forward, her voice cold, unwavering. "You don't have time. I've already given my report to the National Aviation Safety Board, NASB. In less than 24 hours, a federal investigation will be underway." Simmons' pale complexion turned ghostly. "You had no right." "I had every right," Ava interrupted. "Federal law requires all aviation employees to report safety violations. I'm just doing my job." Caldwell slammed his fist on the table. "This is blackmail." Ava tilted her head slightly. "No, Captain Caldwell. This is accountability." Silence suffocated the room. Whitman, the lawyer, whispered urgently to Simmons. Ava could see it in their eyes, they were losing control. "What do you want?" Simmons finally asked, his voice hoarse. Ava's response was immediate and final. "Ground every aircraft with maintenance discrepancies immediately. Conduct a full safety audit with an independent third party. And give me written assurance that no employee who cooperated with my investigation will face retaliation." Caldwell scoffed. "That would bankrupt the company." Ava raised an eyebrow. "As opposed to what happens when the NASB revokes your operating certificate? Or when families of passengers learn you knowingly flew unsafe aircraft?" Another hushed conversation between the executives. After several tense minutes, Simmons exhaled sharply. "We'll agree to the safety audit and non-retaliation clause. But grounding aircraft? That's..." Ava stood abruptly. "Then I walk. And so does every piece of evidence I have." Simmons clenched his jaw, then nodded stiffly. "Fine. You have your terms." But Ava wasn't done. "One more thing." Simmons looked at her with exhausted dread. "Effective immediately, you and Captain Caldwell will step down pending the investigation." Caldwell stood up violently. "Are you out of your damn mind?" Ava remained composed. "Your presence at this company is a liability. The board will have to make a choice, either let you go, or risk a public scandal." Simmons closed his eyes, defeat sinking into his bones. After a long pause, he nodded. "You win, Captain Mitchell." Within hours, SkyWest Airlines announced an immediate grounding of nearly 40% of its fleet. A federal safety audit led by an independent commission. The suspension of Gregory Simmons and Stephen Caldwell. The news sent shockwaves through the industry. Flight delays skyrocketed. Passengers demanded refunds. Shareholders panicked. Ava watched from the sidelines, knowing this was just the beginning. The real damage was yet to come. At midnight, her sister Olivia called with an update. "The New York Times is running the story tomorrow." Ava let out a slow breath. "It's happening." "Oh, it's happening? All right," Olivia said. "SkyWest is done." Over the next 3 weeks, the NASB descended on SkyWest Airlines like a storm. Maintenance logs were seized. Mechanics were interrogated. Flight data was reviewed. The results were worse than Ava had imagined. Dozens of planes had been cleared for flight with critical defects. Pilots had been pressured to ignore warning systems. Employees who spoke out had been systematically blacklisted. As Ava read through the preliminary findings, her stomach turned. SkyWest Airlines had played Russian roulette with thousands of lives, all for profit. And they thought they would get away with it. The end of SkyWest Airlines. Then came the final blow. One morning, Ava woke up to breaking news. SkyWest Airlines loses operating certificate after damning safety report. She stared at the screen in shock. It was over. The company had been permanently grounded. The board of directors filed for bankruptcy within 48 hours. And the Justice Department announced criminal charges against Simmons, Caldwell, and several top executives. Ava felt something settle in her chest. Not relief. Not victory. But justice. 6 weeks later, Ava sat in a cafe across from SkyWest's headquarters, watching as workers removed the company's iconic logo from the building facade. The airline no longer existed. But she did. And so did the people who had helped her bring it down. Daniel Carter slid into the seat across from her. "It's official," he said with a grin. "Atlantic Airways is buying SkyWest's assets. They're offering jobs to all certified staff. Except for the executives, of course." Ava raised an eyebrow. "And you?" "Senior first officer," Daniel said proudly. "What about you?" Ava took a sip of coffee, glancing at the job offers from 3 different airlines. She had also been approached about consulting roles, government positions, and even a book deal. She had more options than she ever imagined. But one thing was certain. She was never waiting outside the door again. A few months later, Ava Mitchell guided a Boeing 787 Dreamliner into the sky. The 4 gold stripes on her sleeve glinted in the morning sunlight. "Beautiful day for flying," she said. Beside her, First Officer Tasha Williams, a young black woman, monitored the instruments with focused precision. "Perfect," Tasha agreed. After a moment, she hesitated. "Captain, I just wanted to say what you did at SkyWest. It's why I kept pursuing aviation when everyone told me to give up." Ava smiled, remembering her own journey. "The sky belongs to all of us, First Officer Williams." She adjusted the controls. "Never forget that." As the aircraft climbed smoothly above the clouds, Ava thought about the words that had started it all. "Captain Mitchell, we need you to wait outside." Those words had been meant to silence her. Instead, they ignited a fire that burned an empire to the ground. She had fought against a system designed to keep her out, and won. Because the sky had no doors. Only horizons waiting to be crossed. On the 5th anniversary of SkyWest Airlines' collapse, Ava received an unexpected email. The sender's name made her pause. Gregory Simmons. Ava hesitated, then opened the message. "Captain Mitchell, you may be surprised to hear from me. But after much reflection during my community service sentence, I've come to recognize the harm my actions caused. While nothing can undo the past, I wanted you to know that your courage forced me to confront truths I had spent a lifetime avoiding. The aviation world is better because you refuse to be silenced. For whatever it's worth, I am sorry." Ava sat with the message for a long while. Then, she typed a simple reply. "Apology accepted, Mr. Simmons. The sky belongs to all of us." As she pressed send, she felt something settle within her. Not an ending, but a continuation. Ava Mitchell had changed aviation forever. And she was far from finished. The breaking point. Ava Mitchell had seen every trick in the book, but this was calculated, deliberate, and ruthless. For weeks, SkyWest Airlines had done everything to push her out. She was assigned to shadow captains known for hostility toward diversity. She was given the worst schedules. She was placed under constant scrutiny, her performance dissected for even the smallest mistakes. It was a hazing ritual, except this wasn't college. It was corporate sabotage. And now? Now, they had just made their biggest mistake. They had underestimated Ava Mitchell. That evening, Ava sat in her Chicago apartment, a glass of Cabernet in hand, her laptop glowing in the dimly lit room. On the screen was a folder filled with notes, reports, and employee testimonies. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Her sister, Olivia, appeared on video call, her face set in a familiar expression, part anger, part lawyer mode. They did what? Olivia's voice crackled through the speakers. Ava took a deep breath. They reassigned me, again. I'm not even flying, Olivia. They're trying to make me quit. Her sister's eyes darkened. Ava, that's textbook discrimination. You could sue them into oblivion. Ava sighed, rubbing her temples. And then what? I become the black woman who sued her way into the cockpit? No one would trust me. I'd never fly again. Olivia's frustration was palpable. So, you're just going to take it? Ava's jaw tightened. I didn't say that. A slow smile crept onto her face, one that Olivia recognized instantly. Ava had a plan. And when Ava had a plan, people should be worried. Later that night, Ava dug deeper. SkyWest Airlines had been around since 1967, a company that prided itself on being America's most reliable carrier. Its safety record was decent, but nothing exceptional. More importantly, its leadership was overwhelmingly white and male. Only 2 women sat on the board of directors. Not a single person of color held an executive position. She scanned through employee reviews. White male pilots? Glowing feedback. Women and minority employees? Complaints about a toxic old boys club. Then she found something bigger. A news article buried from 8 months ago. SkyWest Airlines faces FAA scrutiny over maintenance logs. It was brief, too brief. But it mentioned an FAA review after minor discrepancies were found in maintenance documentation. Ava's instincts screamed. Something wasn't right. The next morning, Ava walked into another shadowing assignment, this time with Captain Andrew Peterson. To her surprise, Peterson was cordial, if reserved. Halfway through the flight to Denver, he glanced at her. For what it's worth, he said quietly, not all of us agree with how they're treating you. Ava studied him carefully. But you're not speaking up, either. Peterson winced, embarrassed. It's complicated. Ava's stomach turned. There it was again, that word. Complicated. It seemed to cover a multitude of sins. She decided to push. How close are you with Barrett and Simmons, SkyWest's executive operations director and senior captain? Peterson hesitated. They've been friends for 30 years. Ava's pulse quickened. Would they protect each other, no matter what? Peterson's expression changed. A flash of unease crossed his face. I didn't say that. He didn't have to. After returning to Chicago, Ava made a new friend. Marcus Jefferson, a maintenance technician with 23 years of experience. And more importantly, he had stories to tell. They met in Hangar 3, away from prying eyes. Marcus kept his voice low, but his words sent shivers down Ava's spine. They're falsifying records. Not just fudging dates, actual structural issues are being downgraded or ignored. Ava's blood ran cold. How widespread? Marcus looked around. At least 30% of the fleet has issues that should ground them. But management keeps pressuring us to sign off. Ava felt sick. And when someone refuses... Marcus hesitated, then said quietly, "They disappear." Ava's heartbeat pounded. "Disappear?" Marcus's voice dropped even lower. "Transfers. Firings. Or worse, accidents." "Like Paul Decker," he added, eyes dark. Ava stilled. Paul Decker. A maintenance technician who fell from a platform last year. Broke his back. Lost his career. The company called it negligence. Marcus shook his head. It wasn't an accident. Ava's hands clenched into fists. That night, Ava spread out everything on her kitchen table. Marcus's testimony. Lauren's photos of ignored safety violations. Her own notes on SkyWest's corruption. She called Olivia. "We have enough." Her sister didn't hesitate. "Send me everything." Ava took a deep breath. "There's one more thing. I need you to look into Paul Decker." Silence. Then Olivia whispered, "You think it wasn't an accident?" Ava's voice was steel. "Nothing at SkyWest happens by accident." The next afternoon, Ava was summoned to the executive conference room. Inside were Gregory Simmons, Thomas Barrett, Harold Wilson, and 2 lawyers. Barrett didn't even offer her a seat. "You've been accessing restricted areas and collecting internal documents," he began coldly. Ava stayed silent. Barrett's face reddened. "We're offering you the opportunity to resign, with a generous severance package. If you refuse, we'll terminate you for cause. Good luck flying for anyone after that." Ava smiled. Then she pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. At 9:00 a.m. this morning, my attorney submitted a report to the FAA detailing systematic safety violations at SkyWest Airlines. Silence. At noon, the Chicago Tribune received similar documentation, along with evidence of retaliation against employees who raised safety concerns. Barrett's face drained of color. "You're bluffing." Ava's voice was deadly calm. "No, Mr. Barrett. I'm giving you a choice." Hours later, the FAA grounded SkyWest Airlines' fleet. Within weeks, the company collapsed under its own lies. Barrett, Simmons, and Wilson were facing criminal charges. And Ava? She was flying again, this time, for Atlantic Airways. As she guided her Boeing 787 into the sky, a young first officer looked at her with admiration. "Captain, you changed everything." Ava smiled. "The sky belongs to all of us, first officer." She pushed the throttle forward, soaring into a future she had built herself. And she knew she would never wait outside again. For centuries, humans had dreamed of conquering the sky. Now, thousands of pounds of metal defied gravity each day, soaring through the clouds with scientific precision and sheer human determination. But for Ava Mitchell, aviation had always meant more than just mechanics and mathematics. Each departing plane represented not just technological achievement, but moral victory, the triumph of integrity over expediency, courage over complicity. She had spent years fighting for those principles. And she had won. "Captain Mitchell." Ava turned to see Sarah Chen, Atlantic Airways chief pilot, approaching her with a warm smile. "I've been looking for you," Sarah said. "The Academy of Aviation Safety wants you to speak at their annual conference. Something about changing corporate culture from within." Ava let out a small laugh. "Not sure I am the best example of working within the system." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Sometimes, breaking the system is the only way to rebuild it properly." Ava turned her gaze toward the night sky. Far above, a plane soared into the dark expanse, its lights blending into the stars. She thought about how far she had come. About the pilots she had mentored. About the passengers who would never know how close they had come to tragedy, because she had refused to be silent. She turned back to Sarah. "Yes," she said. "I think I will." In the months and years that followed, Ava Mitchell became a force of change in aviation. She wasn't just known for her skill in the cockpit, but for her relentless advocacy for safety, accountability, and inclusion. She mentored young pilots, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds, ensuring they had the support and opportunities she had once fought so hard for. She testified before Congress, pushing for stronger whistleblower protections in aviation. She worked with regulators, helping create new policies that prioritize safety over corporate profit. And then, in a historic moment, she was appointed as President of Operational Safety at Atlantic Airways, the first black woman to hold that title at a major airline. The same industry magazine that had once ignored her now placed her on its cover with a bold headline, "The Pilot Who Changed Aviation." Inside, the article chronicled her journey, how her stand against discrimination had exposed dangerous corporate practices, bringing down a corrupt airline and transforming the industry. Ava kept a copy of the magazine. Not out of vanity, but as a reminder. For the days when progress felt too slow. For the moments when old attitudes resurfaced in new guises. For the times when she was tempted to accept good enough instead of demanding excellence. On those days, she would remember the hallway outside the briefing room. The moment when she had been told to wait outside while others decided her fate. She had never waited again. And she taught others not to wait, either. Not for permission to speak the truth. Not for recognition of their worth. Not for a seat at the table where decisions were made. Because sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to wait outside. On the 5th anniversary of SkyWest Airlines' collapse, Ava received an unexpected email. The sender's name made her pause. Richard Simmons. She hesitated before opening it. "Captain Mitchell. You may be surprised to hear from me. After much reflection during my community service sentence, I've come to recognize the harm caused by my actions and attitudes. Nothing can undo the past, but I wanted you to know that your courage forced me to confront truths I had spent a lifetime avoiding. The aviation world is better because you refuse to be silenced. For whatever it's worth, after all this time, I am sorry." Ava sat with the message for a long time. The emotions were complicated. Not just for the apology itself, which felt both too little and remarkably significant, but for what it represented. The possibility of genuine change, even in those who had once been its greatest obstacles. She thought of her father, who had passed away 2 years earlier. How proud he had been to see her vindicated. She thought of Tasha Williams, the young pilot she had once mentored, now a captain herself. She thought of the passengers landing safely every day, because people like her had refused to be silent. Finally, she typed a simple reply. "Apology accepted, Captain Simmons. The sky belongs to all of us." As she pressed send, she felt something settle within her. Not an ending, but a continuation. The story of SkyWest Airlines' downfall had become part of aviation history. A case study in ethics courses. A warning in safety manuals. But Ava Mitchell's story? It was still being written. Because the aviation industry, like society itself, remained imperfect. Bias still existed. Old ways of thinking still lingered. Profit and safety still clashed. And the world still needed voices brave enough to speak the truth. But change had taken root. Slowly, steadily, growing through the cracks in old systems. Ava saw it everywhere. New whistleblower protections. Blind hiring policies for pilots. Stronger safety regulations, enforced by independent oversight. And she saw it in the people. Lauren Kim, now a safety officer. Marcus Jefferson, overseeing maintenance for an entire fleet. James Carter, a senior captain mentoring the next generation. Aviation was evolving. And it had all started because she had refused to wait outside. Somewhere over the vast American landscape, Captain Ava Mitchell guided her Boeing 787 Dreamliner through the boundless sky. The 4 gold stripes on her sleeve caught the morning sunlight as she reached cruising altitude. In the first officer's seat, a young black woman named Danielle Foster adjusted the instruments, focused and determined. Ava glanced at her. "Beautiful day for flying." Danielle smiled. "Perfect, Captain." Then, after a moment's hesitation, she added softly, "What you did at SkyWest. It's why I kept going when people told me to give up." Ava looked at her young co-pilot, feeling the weight of those words. She remembered her own journey. The doors closed in her face. The men who doubted her abilities. The moments she had wanted to quit, but didn't. She smiled. "The sky belongs to all of us, First Officer Foster." And as their aircraft soared above the clouds, Ava knew she would never wait outside again. Ava Mitchell's journey is more than just the downfall of a corrupt airline. It is a testament to the power of courage, integrity, and the willingness to stand up for what is right, even when the cost is high. Her story reminds us that injustice thrives in silence, and sometimes, the only way to fix a broken system is to challenge it head-on, despite the risks. Ava could have chosen to accept the discrimination, the hazing, and the systemic safety violations as just part of the job. Instead, she refused to stay silent. She knew that waiting for permission to be treated fairly or hoping that someone else would fix the problem would never bring change. She chose action over fear, truth over comfort, and safety over corporate politics. One of the most powerful lessons from Ava's story is that true leadership isn't about holding a title, it's about taking responsibility for the well-being of others, even when it's not easy. The aviation industry, like many fields, often resists change. Those in power cling to outdated traditions, using them as an excuse to exclude others or cut corners. But Ava proved that tradition should never come at the expense of progress or human lives. When she saw discrepancies in maintenance logs, she trusted her experience and intuition, risking her job rather than compromising passenger safety. Her actions exposed a deep-rooted culture of negligence and discrimination, ultimately forcing an entire industry to reevaluate its priorities. Another crucial lesson from this story is that real change often requires sacrifice. Ava faced professional isolation, retaliation, and constant pressure to back down. She knew that speaking out against one of America's largest airlines could mean the end of her career, yet she pressed forward. The lesson here is clear: doing the right thing is rarely easy, but it is always necessary. Many people, like Marcus, Lauren, and James, supported Ava but were initially afraid to act. It was her courage and determination that inspired them to step forward. This highlights another important truth: one person's bravery can create a ripple effect, empowering others to stand up as well. The final and perhaps most inspiring lesson is that integrity wins in the end. When Ava refused to wait outside, when she gathered evidence, when she demanded accountability, she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every pilot who had been overlooked, every passenger who unknowingly boarded an unsafe aircraft, and every employee too afraid to speak out. In the end, her perseverance didn't just bring down a corrupt airline, it redefined industry standards, saved lives, and inspired a new generation of aviation professionals. Her story teaches us that the sky has no barriers, only those we refuse to break. If you found Ava Mitchell's story inspiring and believe in the power of standing up for what's right, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Rocket Sparkles. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories of courage, integrity, and justice to light. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think about Ava's fight for truth. Would you have done the same in her position? Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an incredible story that challenges injustice and celebrates those who dare to make a difference. Together, we can create change, one story at a time. Flexed biceps, fire.